In my 13 years of practicing law, this has been by far the strangest trial I've ever had the misfortune of attending. Written by Fate Mazra 787. That day started out pretty normal. I woke up, regretted every decision in my life, kissed my wife good morning, then put on one of those tight, icky, classy suits before heading to work. I walked to work, thinking about the case that I was going to go and defend. It was a losing battle. My client refused to take my advice and plead guilty to get a life sentence instead of execution that he would receive if the jury found him guilty themselves. The investigation is still ongoing, but he thinks they won't find anything. But the smug look the district attorney gave me the last time I saw her, I think they already have. I called my client on the way. He's out on bail. Bailed on a child murder charge, and yes, he's that rich. The call only added to the misery of my morning. He was an asshole, always irritated. I tried to go over my instructions with him about today's hearing, but he was doing that thing when he's always saying affirmatives, the proper amount, and intervals, but you know that he's just dismissing you. I don't like being mocked, and yet, this is my job. Rent needs to be paid. Moving on. After a series of reluctant hellos from acquaintances, I'm finally sitting next to my client in the courtroom. The district attorney is running late, which is so unlike her. It was then that my anxiety sprang into life, running possibilities. Her lateness is either unwarranted, good for me, or she has a trick up her sleeve that needs some tweaking, which is bad for me. And because it's anxiety, it also suggests that maybe she got into a car crash and died. I shut that off immediately. Just as the judge starts losing her patience, the district attorney burst through the door. Only a figure of speech. She came in normally as to not disturb the court. She sat down in her designated seat, the same front row as I am. You know the drill. I examine her. She looks as composed as ever. Eyeliner perfectly, though a bit too creatively winged. Her makeup was impeccable, save for a concealer that wasn't nearly enough to cover her eye bags. Her dark hair was put into braids around her head, and her suit had not a trace of a wrinkle on it. She smiled, with a bit of nervosity poorly hidden, but still confidently. By her side was a school bag. My client and I stared, wide eyes, baffled. Even he understood that you just do not bring a piece of evidence and carry it this casually. Or maybe it was because he recognized it. I don't know. Running late, Miss Yang, the judge chastised with a sharp tone. My apologies, Your Honor. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Calling the case of the people of the state of Redacted versus Edward M. on the murder of 14-year-old Lucas S. Are both sides ready? I'll spare you the full procedure. I put on my customer service voice and gave my opening, short and concise. I stressed the fact that there was yet no definitive proof that my client is guilty, and that therefore he cannot be justly detained. The district attorney spoke next. She gave her opening long and sentimental as expected. After that came the time to interview the witnesses. I called Meredith, my client's wife, to the stand to testify. I asked her standard questions. Where were you the 3rd of November at 6 a.m.? She said that she was at home. Her husband was by her side in bed. When did he leave the house? 7:30. I toss a look to the jury. They're not convinced. I'm not either. But I'm doing my best with what I have. This is an uphill battle. I knew it even more so when I saw Yang interview my witness, tear into her allegations with such ease, exposing her lies bare. I tried to keep my cool. There was no substantial evidence yet. Maybe I still got this. God, I hope I did. But I did not. "The witness is excused," the judge said. "The prosecution may call the next witness." This was the beginning of the end. "The people call a very special guest, one who traveled a long way to attend this court. If your honor may allow me a few minutes of the court's time in order to accommodate their arrival," the DA said. The judge and I both had our interest piqued. "You may," the judge said. Yang smiled and reached for the backpack under the table. She walked to the center of the court, then emptied its contents. It spilled a black, gooey substance. Everybody was far too confused to object, argue, or do anything, really. We all sat and watched as the district attorney apparently lost her mind. The substance stank of rot. It was unbearable. Before anyone could protest, the lights started to flicker on and off, and a sudden air of fright washed upon us and sealed our mouths shut. A fog started to form inside the room, and the doors all slammed shut as if by a strong wind. I looked around, trembling. We all did, except for Yang. She stood there calmly and waved. "I call to the stand the murder victim, Lucas S." She waves at the stand, and the hair on my skin stands at the side of it. The stand, which had been empty a few moments ago, was now occupied by the translucent body of a teenager, flickering between two images. One resembling the photos we've all seen of him. A lively teenage boy with dark red hair, brilliant blue eyes, and freckles spilled on his nose and across his cheeks. He's wearing a band t-shirt and jean shorts. The second image is elementally the same, but his skin is yellow, almost bluish in color. Green rot and what looks from afar like maggots have replaced his eyes, while multiple bloody gashes cut across his face. His jaw is slack, leaning to one side, while dark, almost black blood spills from it and stains his teeth. His t-shirt is ripped and bloodied, barely covering a grotesque rotting torso riddled with stab wounds. Moss and river plants hang on his shoulders, from his mouth, and from the gaps on his shirt. I turn slowly to my client, only to see him passed out in terror. I should be pissing my pants right now, but I find enough courage in myself to give my back to the monster and slap the one beside me awake. He wakes with a jolt and looks at him, then back at me, then at Yang. All color drains from his face. "What the hell, man?" he mutters in a trembling voice. He gets up and sprints for the door. "I should have done that. Why didn't I do that?" Turning to his direction, I see that everyone else besides me, Edward, Yang, and Judge Achayana, the jury, and the spirit of Lucas S., has disappeared. Edward tries the door, pulls at it with all of his strength, but it's somehow locked. Yang, what's the meaning of this?" the judge says as she stumbles down from her chair, cross in hand. She yells in all the authority that terror has left in her. "Stop this at once!" "I'm afraid I cannot, Your Honor," Yang says coolly, smile not even faltering. "He will not be leaving until he gets to testify. There is no other way. Such is his right." "Are you effing insane?" I find myself yelling. She ignores me. "Please, may I carry on, Your Honor?" The judge stared at me. I stared back. Some of the jury members were crying. I wanted to cry too. "What if I delay the hearing to another date?" the judge asked. "I'm afraid that's not possible either. He will not let anyone out until the trial is done." As if on cue, the boy, still flickering and not settling on an image, stretched out his arm, and Edward, still wrestling with the door, flew as if pulled by an unnatural force, which was probably what was happening. He flew back and was seated in his previous seat. Cuffs flew from the floor and chained him to the table. The silence that follows is unbearable. Sweat forms on my brow as I stare into the abnormality on the stand. No matter what image he is fuzzy around the edges, translucent going up and down on a spectrum while he was still visible. He catches my eyes and I turn around so quickly that my neck almost cramps. Terror whispers in my ear that he'll kill me. If not for defending his murderer, then for staring. His murderer. The fact that Yang brought him here with such confidence only means that Edward really did kill him. I'm just doing my job. I want to yell at him. I gotta put food on the table somehow, man. But I doubt that will faze him. What would a 14-year-old know about providing? Would he have empathy for it? You may carry out the interview, Yang. Judge Atsuwana says in a trembling voice. Thank you, Your Honor. Yang nods, then with the softest voice possible, she asked the boy, Lucas, can you tell us what happened? And he spoke. His voice sounded like a lot of people at once, but it had the distinct high-pitched cracks of a teenager's voice. I went to school every 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. I lived pretty far away and walked to school, so I'd be out of my home early, like 5:30. Ever since the beginning of the year, I've always felt off going to school. I felt watched. The day I died was the day I met Edward. He asked me for directions, then asked me to walk him, then he asked me to help him carry the bag he had in his hand. Then he asked me to wait for him as he took a leak in the forest. Then he asked me to come and see a deer carcass. I was too kind, too naive to say no. I was taught to be helpful, that every good deed returned and paved the way to make your life easier in the future. This one cost me my life. He pushed me to the ground, pulled out a knife and stabbed me. He twisted the knife, punched my broken bones, kicked until I was a heap of broken bones and blood and pain. When I died, he tossed me into the river like a water bottle, like a cigarette butt that he was done smoking. Everything I was and everything that I know and everything I was to become ended for a reason I don't know yet. Why did you do it, Edward? Was it worth it? To say that I was speechless was an understatement. Edward remained silent as well, though with the pallor of his face, he might as well be dead. Defense, do you have any questions for the witness? The judge asked. Startled to be addressed, I quickly muttered, no, Your Honor. Really, Mark? Yang replied with a sneer. In every other case, you always had something to say. I'm sure you do now. Don't be shy. If it weren't for the vengeful spirit by her side, I would have cussed her out. I forced a fake smile instead. I'll pass, I said. It was then I felt a force pulling me to the well of the court. I stood there frozen, almost pissing my pants. Ask, the spirit said between gritted teeth. My head was reeling. This was it, I thought. The thing was, aside from the pure terror I felt at the moment, I really didn't have any questions to ask. At least, none that wouldn't offend him into killing all of us at once. Like, what were you wearing at the time? Were either of you intoxicated? If this were a regular witness, I would work on undermining their confidence, string out lies and inconsistencies in their stories. But this is the victim. What is there to undermine? I took out my emergency cards. On them were questions intended for different witnesses, obviously. There was one for his mother, one for the officer in charge of the investigation and another for the hiker who found his body. The cards were useful. Their familiarity helped me compose myself and helped remind me of what a question is, something that I had forgotten in my fright. My memory jump-started with adrenaline and hope, rewound not only every case I've defended, but also every horror movie I've ever watched. While tuning out, of course, every time the main characters died horribly at the hands of a supernatural abomination. Basically, I organized every useful bit of information into a neat PowerPoint projected on my brain. It was some of my best cognitive work. It even gave me a golden answer. I put on my confidence mask and decided that if I die, so be it. I'm not gonna die frightened. All right then. I cleared my throat. What's your name and age? His normal face gave me an annoyed look.
Lucas S., 14 years old.
Eye color?
Blue.
Names of your parents? Objection, relevance. Yang sounded annoyed as well. Just my goal. Pardon me, I say innocently. I was just checking to make sure that his memory works well since, I'm sure something as traumatic as death would certainly make a mind foggy. The boy looked angry. Both of his faces were. Typical teenage temper.
My memory works just fine.
His voice came out deeper, more staticky. You see, that's where I disagree. You said you walked to school, right?
Yes.
But here, I have that you lived in the suburbs near the Bradson & Co. wool factory. There's a bus that picks up 2 blocks away from your residence and stops right across the street from Nixon High, your school. Even if you didn't take the bus for some reason, it's a 3 hours walk. Not 1.5. If you take the bridge, which most people do, you'll be able to avoid the woods completely. I turned to the judge and the district attorney. I know because my brother lives there. I go every weekend. Then I continued. The only way the path you described works is if you lived in the Kimley corner, which you did, before your family moved out in 1997, when you were in elementary school. I paused to evaluate the reactions. The spirit is too puzzled to be angry. See, Lucas, I'm not saying that you're lying. I believe you just got it mixed up. It happens. He looked at me confused. And yet, it is a pretty big mix-up. Who's to tell that your memory is completely intact? That death didn't take from you more than your heartbeat and corporeal body. Your Honor, we can't possibly draw conclusions, Yang said. I interrupted. I'm not done yet, Your Honor. Look at him. His eyes are blue, correct? Yes, they are, the judge answered. And yet... I took out a couple of prints of 3 pictures. 2 selfies and 1 group photo. In the selfies, you can clearly see that his eyes are green. It's just that the particular lighting in the group photo makes them look blue. More so, the band t-shirt he's wearing in which he was found dead, it's a Black Veil Bride t-shirt, and not the Pierce the Veil t-shirt that he's wearing right now. He's never owned one of those. But I see how someone who had only seen the tattered and faded shirt would make the mix-up. Even more, Lucas was, in life, taller than average, which is not the case here. With inconsistencies at this scale, Your Honor, one cannot help but wonder if this is the ghost of Lucas S., who can't even remember what he looked like, or if it's someone or something else entirely. Who's to say that this isn't a long-dead spirit that forgot itself and stuck to the first identity offered, searching desperately for any image to claim? I turned to the spirit to find his image even blurrier, but what I can see of the expression on his face is an incredibly devastated one. So, Lucas, I ask you again, once again, what's your name? A heavy silence falls before a choked voice came out, seemingly from everywhere, and said,
I don't know. I don't know.
A devastated cry filled the room as the figure on the stand dissipated and the courtroom returned to normal. With the audience present, the doors unlocked, and the air much more breathable. Despite myself, I broke down crying with relief. My client was ruled innocent, and the DA Yang, she was unable to be charged with anything. Summoning a ghost to testify isn't exactly a crime, but she still lost her law license. So now, what I came here to ask is, how do I live with the fact that the spirit of Lucas was actually correct about the address? How do I live with the fact that I, in case the spirit was really Lucas, potentially might have both psychologically manipulated an already frail mind into losing its sense of identity and caused a murderer to walk free? This what if is driving me crazy. I can't sleep at night anymore. The only thing that can save me is if they find a different murderer and confirm that the spirit was, in fact, not Lucas. Until then, I might not ever know. The uncertainty haunts me. It doesn't help that as I go to bed every night, I can almost see red hair and piercing blue eyes on the reflection in my window.